Thank you, Sir Robert. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning. Now, imagine you're at home and you've just cleared away the dinner and there's a knock at the door and you look at your partner. Are you expecting anyone? No. You answer the door and a police officer is standing there to deliver the most dreadful news that anyone could ever hear, that your son or your daughter has been killed in a car accident. Now, I'm sure everybody here would agree that the loss of a child is the very worst thing that could happen to anyone. It goes against the very order of things, and no family ever recovers from their loss. And sadly, Sir Robert, I've had a number of grieving parents come to my surgeries over the last 12 years to talk about the terrible impact of the death of a child, either as a passenger in a car or whilst driving alone or with friends. My heart goes out to every parent who's ever had to receive this terrible news, and in particular to my constituents Chris and Nicole Taylor, who lost their beloved daughter Rebecca in 2008. Chris and Nicole came to see me soon after I became an MP in 2010, and I've tried to support their brilliant campaign that seeks to significantly reduce the risk of any other young, inexperienced driver dying on our roads. Sir Robert, evidence submitted by the Department for Transport to the Transport Committee's Young and Novice Driver Inquiry in 2020 revealed that whilst young drivers account for only 7% of full driving licence holders, in 2019 they were involved in 23% of fatal and serious collisions in the UK. And in 2021, the AA surveyed their members, asking them what they thought were the greatest safety risks to teenagers. The responses clearly came back that members thought drugs, gun and knife crime were, in their view, the greatest risk to young people. But in fact, road deaths are by far and away the greatest risk, at 17% of deaths of 5 to 19-year-olds, compared to 9% of all deaths being alcohol and drug-related and 7% due to homicide. Road deaths clearly pose the much bigger risk. Now my constituents, Chris and Nicole, have joined forces with Rad Seeger, another constituent, who campaigned so tirelessly with Harry Dunn's family to achieve justice for Harry following his tragic road death in 2019. Their campaign is calling for new arrangements for young people as they learn to drive and become used to our busy and dangerous roads. First, they're recommending that any learner driver should complete a minimum learning period of 50 hours driving or 6 months in time before they can take their practical driving test. During this time, they should complete a logbook of driving under different road and weather conditions. Second, they recommend that young drivers who have just passed their driving test should wait for a period of time, up to a year, before being allowed to carry other young passengers. Statistics have shown that young drivers are more likely to be involved in a collision with a similar-aged passenger in the car. In 2016, 25% of casualties for those aged 17 to 24 were passengers. Of course.
Thank you, Sir Robert. Can I thank my right friend for raising that point around what are so-called graduated driving licences, and can I just lend my support to her calls for that? Emily Challen in my constituency, whose parents live in Normanton, she was killed when her friend had only had a driving licence for 8 months, and 3 of them were in the car, and they drove tragically into the back of a HGV. We need to protect our young people because the significance and the responsibility of driving others is far beyond what I believe I recognised to be the case when I was a young driver. And as she says quite clearly, the stats show that we need to protect our young people so that they can protect their friends and loved ones. So can I ask the Minister to reflect graduated and live driving licences, particularly his comments when he responds?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for telling the story of her constituents. And across the country, Sir Robert, there are far, far too many similar cases, tragic cases. So going back to the recommendations of the campaign of my constituents, Their third recommendation is that young drivers should not be allowed to drive between midnight and 4 a.m. The risk of a young driver being involved in a collision is 8 times higher between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. on both weekdays and weekends. Now, my constituents and I, of course, recognise that there will need to be exceptions to any such restrictions, such as for young parents taking their own children out in a car, or indeed for young people who are travelling to work between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m. And that would be perfectly easily created as exceptional circumstances. And I have to say, Sir Robert, I have every sympathy with the aims of my constituents' campaign, and I do urge the Minister to look at the merits of these modest but potentially incredibly effective measures. And then a further recommendation that has been made to me by many others is that the use of black boxes for young drivers should be compulsory when they're first on the roads. I certainly will.
A little late, I had a chemotherapy session, guys, and it overran, so I'm sorry for that. But the Right Honourable Friend knows I'm a great supporter of this. The first 1,000 miles that a young person drives are the crucial ones. Absolutely crucial. Anything we can do, in a sense, to delay, to help, support, and make sure that they're safe. And of course, she will know better than anyone else here, Sir Robert, that this is the biggest killer worldwide. People forget. It's not any disease. It's the biggest kill of children and young people worldwide is death on the road.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his point and for rushing across here straight from his procedure, and that I think demonstrates his great regard for the importance of this subject. So thank you to him. So, Sir Robert, black boxes are the good spy in your car, and they record data about a driver's driving style, such as whether the driver is taking corners safely and whether they're keeping to the speed limit. And not only that, but data from the British Insurance Brokers Association says that these black boxes in cars can result in savings of more than £1,000 a year in insurance costs for some young drivers. So a real win-win. And in evidence to the Transport Select Committee in 2021, telematics insurer provider Insure the Box confirmed that its technology has assisted 80,000 young drivers to reduce speeding per mile by 21%, and they estimate that that's resulted in 700 fewer crashes and 22 fewer serious injuries. Now, the Minister will, of course, be aware that only recently the concept of graduated driver's licences was the subject of a full Transport Select Committee inquiry, and that took place in 2021. The GDL, the Graduated Driver's Licence, proposes a minimum supervised learning period, an intermediate licence period that places quite strong restrictions on the newly qualified driver, and then a full unrestricted driving licence only available after completion of the first 2 stages. International evidence was put forward to the committee at the time, showing that the GDL can reduce collisions and trauma from accidents involving young drivers by 20 to 40%. But of course, the main concerns about GDLs are that it reduces access to employment and education, that it impacts on young people living and working in rural areas, and that the restrictions may be hard to enforce. Nevertheless, the Transport Select Committee's report recommended that the Department for Transport should resume a study into the social and economic consequences of GDL, which it committed to in its 2019 Road Safety Statement. Now, many people will argue, and indeed the Minister may seek to argue, that a GDL is not enforceable, but in a direct response to that, I would say that in the vast majority of cases, young people learning to drive are extremely sensible, if not actually a bit scared of getting behind the wheel, and they have no desire to crash their car, and they certainly have no desire to harm themselves or cause harm to any other young person. So whilst there may understandably be some reluctance to changing the rules, it is nevertheless my view that young people would, on the whole, comply with those new rules around learning to drive, and as a result we would see a massive decrease in the number of deaths and injuries on our roads. Now, Sir Robert, I am so grateful to the many across this House and the other place, so many of whom have shown a significant interest in this area. And I'm sorry that this debate is, in fact, relatively short, because there were many who were keen to contribute to it. I'm particularly delighted that the noble lady, Baroness Jenkin of Kennington, will also be tabling a question in the other place on this same topic, demonstrating her concern and interest. And I also do want to finally pay tribute to all those parents, including Chris and Nicole, who have shown such determination, and Charlotte Charles and Tim Dunn for their passion in making sure that no other family has to suffer the terrible losses that they have all endured. Thank you.